Now look at verse 45. But he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas. What seas? The Dead Sea here and the Mediterranean Sea, in the glorious holy mountain. That's when he enters into Palestine in the middle of the 7 years and starts the great tribulation and demands everybody inside of his empire to take a mark in the right hand or be killed. That's going to happen in that part of the world, all right. And then he will reign for 42 months. 42 months. And during that 42 months, he's fighting against the countries of the north and east practically all that time till he conquers them. Then he leads those newly conquered countries together with the 10 kingdoms, together with countries that whom he hasn't overthrown, but who will cooperate with him through the ministry of the 3 unclean spirits. They come down around Jerusalem to destroy it and to retake Jerusalem. At the end of this time, then the Lord appears in the clouds of heaven, defeats the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies, seizes the governments of this world in one day's battle, sets up a kingdom in this world forever, even forever and ever. Now you see in verse 45 it predicts that this man, after entering into Palestine, will change his capital. Where is his capital before he takes over Jerusalem and makes it his capital during that last 3.5 years? Where is his capital? Why, his capital before that is on the river Euphrates, in what the Bible calls Babylon. Babylon. Babylon will be the capital of the Antichrist, will be the capital of the Syrian division of the old Grecian Empire. For Babylon was in that Syrian division of the Grecian Empire. He is called the king of Babylon in Isaiah 13 and 14. In the 14th chapter of the book of Isaiah, for example, verse 3, God said, in the day that the Lord will give you Jewish people rest from your labor and from your sorrow, that thou shalt take up a proverb or a triumph song against the king of Babylon. Then he gives a whole curse from that 5th verse on about a king of Babylon that the Israelites will fight against in the latter days. The 50th and 51st chapters of Jeremiah also speak of Babylon being in existence in the latter days. The 5th chapter of the book of Zechariah, the last verses predict that Babylon will be rebuilt in the latter days. So in Revelation we have the same prediction, for we read of three messenger angels preaching the everlasting gospel, preaching the doom of Babylon, and preaching the doom of those who will worship the beast in those days and in those countries. There's Babylon mentioned as being destroyed. Then in the 17th chapter of Revelation, rather the 16th chapter, verse 17, we have a picture of the destruction of literal Babylon under the 7th vial. While we read, great Babylon was destroyed and the cities of the nations fell by that earthquake. And in chapter 18, it gives you a literal description of the future destruction of a great commercial center of the world, which will be the capital of the Antichrist, until he changes his capital from Babylon to Jerusalem. Then he will reign in Jerusalem the last 3.5 years. Not personally, for he himself leads his armies out of Palestine after taking over those countries. He leads them north against Russia and Germany and those countries, and leads them to personal victory over those countries. Then, after conquering them, gathers them, comes back into Palestine. He will find by that time Jerusalem will have been taken over by the Jews again, by the help of the 2 witnesses and other means. And that's what Jesus referred to in Matthew 24 when he said, except those days be curtailed. That is the days of persecution from Israel upon Israel, when Israel will flee from Palestine into the mountains. He said, except those days be curtailed, there shall no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake those days shall be cut short. See, God stirs up these enemies in the north and east against the Antichrist, and he does not have time to exterminate the nation of Israel, you see. He lets them go for the time being, to conquer these new enemies. Then he comes down to destroy the Jews as he wanted to do in the middle of the 7 years. But God cut short that persecution by raising up these new enemies so that some flesh could be saved. If he didn't have this war with Russia and those countries in the north and east to fight, why, he could have gone on down into Arabia and would have conquered Arabia and killed all those Jews off as he wanted to do, you see. But God occupies his attention and his forces in another war before he decides to come down against the Jews who had fled from Judea into the mountains And then when half of the city is taken this time, then the Lord shall go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought on the day of battle. His feet shall stand that day upon the Mount of Olives. The battle of Armageddon will be fought. The Jews will be delivered. The Antichrist will be destroyed. The Gentiles will be destroyed. And the Jewish people will become the head of the nations in those days and forever. All right, now we have in verse 45 now again where his capital will be after he enters into Palestine. It'll be in the glorious holy mountain. That's the same thing that Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2 said when he mentioned the coming of the man of sin, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember you not, he said, when I was yet with you, I told you these things. And you know what withholdeth that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now hindereth or letteth will let until he be taken out of the way, and then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Now then, look one more part of this book, and then we will have completed the whole book with the exception of the 9th chapter of Daniel. We'll deal with that next Wednesday, Lord willing. Look at chapter 12 now, verse 1. And at that time, at what time? At the time that he enters into Palestine and sets himself in the Jewish temple, takes over Jerusalem as his capital, takes over the Jewish temple as his capital building. At that time shall Michael stand up, that great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, Daniel's people. And at that time there shall be a time of trouble such as never was, since there was a nation. And at that time thy people, Daniel's people, shall be delivered. How many of them? Every one that shall be found written in the book. Now, Mr. Daniel, I want you to tell those folk down in Atlanta that when that man sets himself in the Jewish temple, takes over Palestine, Michael is going to stand up, and your people are going to be translated. Everyone whose name is found written in the book of life at that time. Every Jewish person in Christ will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. And the great tribulation will begin. Now that reminds us of the 12th chapter of Revelation, where we read a woman clothed with the sun, standing upon the moon, upon her head a crown of 12 stars. She being with child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. There appeared another great wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 7 crowns upon his heads, and 10 horns, and his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven. The dragon stood before the woman to devour her child as soon as it was born. She brought forth a man-child who was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath the place prepared of God that should feed her 1,260 days. And verse 13, when the dragon saw that he was cast out into the earth, he persecuted the woman which had brought forth the man-child already gone. And he causes waters to come out of his mouth to swallow the woman, or to consume the woman, but the earth helps the woman, swallows the flood, and the woman gets safe into the wilderness, and the dragon is wroth and goes back to make war with the remnant of her seed. Now in verse 7 he said, I saw war in heaven, Michael and his angels fought, and the dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. The great red dragon was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And when the dragon saw he was down here, and he had no more place in heaven, then he persecuted the woman. He first wanted the man-child. Man-child was caught up. Then he turned on the woman. She escapes. Then he turns on the remnant of the woman. All that's in the 12th chapter of Revelation. So if you'll read the 12th chapter of Daniel, verse 1, with the 12th chapter of Revelation, verse 7, you have the same thing. Shall Michael stand up, that great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And at that time there shall be a great tribulation, and at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. In chapter 7 of Daniel, or Revelation rather, we have between the 6th and 7th seals 144,000 Jews being sealed for protection to go through the trumpet judgments. For it was said to the first 4 trumpet judgment angels, hurt not the earth, or the grass, or the trees, or the seas, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their forehead. And I heard the number of them that were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. In chapter 9, verse 4, special direction is given to the 5th and 6th trumpet judgment angels, saying, hurt only those men which have not the seal of God. See, the 144,000 Jews are saved and are being protected through these trumpet judgments. They're caught up to heaven as the man-child in chapter 12. Where in chapter 14 we see the 144,000 the next time in heaven, having been translated between the time they were mentioned in the 5th and 6th trumpets, and this 14th chapter, the man-child had been caught up, for the 144,000 had been caught up. For in chapter 14 he said he saw a lamb on Mount Zion, with him 144,000, having his father's name written in their foreheads. They sung a new song before the throne, before the 4 beasts, before the 24 elders, that no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. Therefore they are without fault before the throne of God. So the last time we find them, they're on earth. Next time they're in heaven, having been translated. So the 144,000 are definitely symbolized by the man-child. That's what's referred to in Daniel 12:1. Thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book, 144,000 of them. And then Israel will flee from the Antichrist and from Judea into the wilderness. I will point that out to you later, where they will be where they will be kept by God, where they will be protected by the Arabs in that land of Arabia, for Edom and Moab and Ammon escape the Antichrist. And then they will be there during that time. Then they will get control of their city, a number of them at least, or those in the city and the 2 witnesses are what's left there. They'll get control of the city at the end of that 3½ years. So chapter 12 definitely pictures the Antichrist causing the great tribulation, the catching up with the Jewish godly people, and Michael casting the devil down to the earth and so on. Then a statement is made in verse 7, how long shall this be? And he said, for a time, times, and a half a time, or a dividing of time. Thus the Antichrist will be given power for a time, times, and a dividing of time, which is explained in chapter 12 of Revelation, verse 6, is to be 1,260 days. That is explained in Revelation, or stated in Revelation 12:14 again, to be the same thing as in Daniel 12:7. Time, times, and a dividing of time, or half a time. 3½ years. That is explained further in Revelation 13:5 as being 42 months. All those periods, 42 months, 1,260 days, time, times, and a half a time, refer to the last 3½ years of this age, that the Antichrist will be given power over the 10 kingdoms that will be then located inside of the old Roman Empire territory. Thus, now we come to verse 13, or rather verses 11, 12, and 13 of the 12th chapter. You have 3 periods mentioned in Daniel 12. Verse 7, 1 period, a time, times, and a half a time. That's 1,260 days. Then you have another period, an additional period, 1,290 days. I think that's verse 11, isn't it? And then in verse 13, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. See, blessed is the man that waits and comes to that particular point. So that proves, you see, that all these dates refer to the same period. Now, the only difference between the periods is this: 30 days more than 1,260 days in this second period. Then you have a period of 75 days beyond the 1,260 days in verse 13. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh. During those 75 days, from the time that Christ will come to the earth at the end of the 1,260 days, there will be the gathering of the nations to judgment. I'll gather all nations against Jerusalem to judgment. There the sheep and the goats will be divided. And other things preparatory to the actual proclamation of the millennial kingdom will be carried on during those 75 days. And the man that is blessed and lives through the judgment of the nations, lives through the tribulation period, lives through the battle of Armageddon and all that, and actually is alive and permitted to enter the kingdom, Just simply says, blessed is he that cometh to the 1335 days, the actual beginning of the millennial kingdom. And then Christ will reign on the earth forever, even forever and ever.